Welcome to the Grazing Grass Podcast, episode 74.
There's a lot of resources out there, but nothing beats boots on the ground, a ranch near you with someone who's successful in making their living.
You're listening to the Grazing Grass Podcast, helping grass farmers learn from grass farmers, and every episode features a grass farmer and their operation. I'm your host, Cal Hardage. Imagine a world where ranching nurtures our earth. Welcome to the vision of the Noble Research Institute. This nonprofit champions regenerative agriculture, turning research into practical solutions for farmers and ranchers. On their 14,000 acres of working ranches, they showcase principles that enhance soil health, boost grazing productivity, and uplift the entire ecosystem. On today's show, we have Dan Glenn from Deep Grass Graziers. It's a wonderful show. We talk about his journey. We wrap up a little bit with heifer and bull development on grass. You don't want to miss this one. Before we talk to Dan, 10 seconds about my farm. And rather than talk about my farm, I'm talking about what I'm doing this weekend. If you're going to the South Pole Field Day and sell, you'll probably see me there. So come over and say hi. I will be wearing a grazing grass shirt. We'll look, see if anybody else is. But if you're over there, come say hi when you see me. I'm excited to travel down to Albertville, Alabama. So I think Teddy Gentry's speaking and Greg Judy's speaking. So those will be interesting to hear. So looking forward to it. I'll let you know about it next week. Don't forget about the Grazing Grass community on Facebook. We've added the Grazing Grass community on Facebook as a place for grazing grass discussions. And it is growing very quickly. You can just get on Facebook and do a search for Grazing Grass community. And it'll pop up and just join. And we have a couple of questions on there that's not required because the required questions drive me crazy. But I do appreciate when you take a moment to fill them out. It helps me know you a little bit better. We have great visions in the future for it. Thank you. Enough of that. Let's talk to Dan. Dan, we want to welcome you to the Grazing Grass Podcast. We're excited for you to join us today.
Thanks for having me, Cal. Always fun to speak with other people interested in ranching and making the soils a little bit better than we found them.
Very true. And Dan, to get started, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your operation?
I grew up here on the farm that I find myself on now. Only child, only grandchild, son and grandson of farmers on both sides of my family. Growing up, really had no interest in being a farmer or on the farm. I had my head in a book, went off to school and studied English and journalism, and you get an English degree and you have the freedom to do whatever you want to with your life. I got the opportunity to do a lot of different things, from catering to bartending to landscaping. I did a brief stint in St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands, where I helped found a school of sustainable agriculture, and then had the opportunity to move back to that family farm. And even when I moved back, I wasn't sure exactly, what my role was here. And we had cattle. My grandfather's had cattle since the 60s, and he had passed away by the time I came back. But I had the opportunity to step in and start looking after our cattle, and quickly fell in love with cattle, and then, with forages, and eventually found my way to really have a love for soil health as well.
So when you came back, you mentioned just then you found that love for soil health in that journey. Did you come back to the farm thinking some of these more progressive ideas, or were you thinking, I'm going to do it like we've always done it?
So I would say that I've always been a little outside the box. I come from a kind of an organic ag background, sustainable ag background, and even permaculture. So really thinking, about things from more of a long-term perspective, as opposed to a maximum model, short-term, gain from those mindsets. Now, having said that, when I came home, I wasn't quick to make any big changes because I wasn't an expert at any of those things. And so I really had to spend some time here and figure out what part of our existing program I wanted to maintain, and what were the things that I needed to change in order to live a life here and make my mark on the farm. So,
oh yeah. When you came back, describe the farm to us at that point.
Sure. So, and we row crop my family. I have about 4 full-time row crop employees. So we farm about 1,000 acres of peanuts and corn in rotation. And then we had a few hundred beef cattle, and we were retaining stockers. We'd wean our calves in the fall after peanuts were harvested, retain those in a feedlot type scenario and feed them corn silage and soybean meal, take those cattle up to 7 to 8 weights and then sell them in the spring. With the first run up in corn around 2012, I sat down with an economist and we thought, well, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to, run this expensive corn through these cattle. And so I stopped feeding in that traditional manner that year and haven't, kind of never turned back, focused more on winter annual production. I live in a zone that really can have something growing about 12 months out of the year. And that's when I met, as my education kind of unfolded through academia and extension and networking peer-to-peer and meeting some mentors, I really got involved with genetics. And that's when I slowly started changing the herd makeup to the types of animals that I thought would optimize, the type of management I wanted to employ.
And before we continue down that path just a little bit, let's talk about where you're located.
I'm about an hour, 15 minutes north of the Florida line in the central part of the state, just a little east of central. I'm about 35 minutes east of Tifton, Georgia. Tifton's on I-75. That's the coastal plains. So we have, predominantly sandy loam soils. We are in the Bahia, Bermuda belt below the fescue belt. We are firmly entrenched in the gnat zone. So if you come visit me in the summertime, be prepared to, use your mouth to blow air at the gnats that are hovering around your face.
Okay, very good. Just give everyone an idea where you're located. You talked about there when you started making that change in 2012 and you're looking at what you're doing. You mentioned a focus on genetics. How did you identify what you wanted and what was your base herd you were working with?
Sure. Yeah. So the base herd was a real traditional Angus cross genetic herd. A lot of Sim Angus. Grandpa had been using Sim Angus bulls for the past probably 10 years. And they did, they were great for his program. They were pretty growthy. They had, a good combination of muscle and fattening ability. And they did well in our feedlot situation. It was an effective program. It just wasn't something I was very passionate about as far as, kind of maintaining the status quo. I came to this actually from a eating standpoint. One of the reasons when I moved back home, I wanted to open a farm to table restaurant and I wanted to supply our beef. And so from a chef and an eating perspective, I wanted to make really good, high quality grass finished beef because, my early studies told me that I believe that, grass finished beef is a little bit better for you than corn fed beef. I think beef in general is a good, nutrient dense product. I don't want to down anybody's product, but I was really looking to produce a superior grass finished beef and serve it to my customers. But as I, went down the rabbit hole of everything there is to learn about, cattle and grazing and soil health, I've got to put the restaurant thing on the back burner. So that got me interested in the type of cattle because I finished some of those first cows and it was hard. I mean, those were frame 6 on average females, frame 5 to frame 6 females. I had steers that didn't, and I was also really interested in a proper finish. So full brisket, fill, tail rump fat. I wanted to produce kind of a superior steak product as well. Call me quixotic. But some of those steers didn't finish until they were 15 to almost 1,600 pounds at around 25, 26 months. Met more mentors and come to understand the landscape of genetics. I recognized that I wanted to take that frame size down a little bit, concentrate more on the straight British breeds, and really easy fleshing animal. And so that started my journey.
Well, you mentioned there, why British breeds?
So, the British breeds are cattle that have historically been used more either single purpose or dual purpose, for meat and milk, as opposed to a lot of the continental breeds, which oftentimes were also used for draft. The muscling of the continental breeds makes them a really good cross for our feedlot situations and for efficiently making a big carcass to hang on the rail and also to grow aggressively. But the British breeds were the Angus, Red Angus, Devon, Herefords even. They typically can marble and fatten on grass as a group. There's certainly, a smart person has said, and people re-say all the time, there's as much variation inside a breed as there are between breeds at times. But that was overarching. We started with Black Angus genetics for more that older type, that kind of original Angus type. I started, my first foray into that was meeting a breeder in West Point, Georgia, named Ed Oliver of Oliver Family Angus today. Today, Spencer, his son, still is running that program. And I bought a bull from Ed and really liked what they did for me. And I came back the next year and I bought all his bull calves to raise, to develop and sale, and to use, the bulls on my program that I wanted to. And so kind of developed, that was one of my first, relationships with someone I would call a real breeder. And that kind of got me started in the road of grass genetics.
And as you started down that journey and you're picking out bulls that fit that model or those features you're looking for, did you continue with your base cow herd, or did you bring in some heifers as well?
I did both of those things. So I didn't want to throw away, 40 years of environmental adaptability. I had, even though I was attempting to go in a different direction than my grandfather, he was a good cattleman. He was a successful cattleman. And so while there were things about the home herd I did not like, docility being one, udders being another, there are certainly things that we selected against and managed differently. But I had a lot of respect for the fact that, he had been selecting in his environment for a long time. So actually I was about to say the grandchildren and great grandchildren of his herd are still there, but actually some of his cattle are still there. I had a 22-year-old cow that actually got on a trailer earlier this year. I was going to let her die on the trailer. And then when beef prices went to $1, I was like, girl, can you get on that trailer? At 22 years old. So, and I've got probably an 18-year-old right now still calving for me as well. So certainly something to be said for the, those cattle that have lived and worked in our environment for a long time. And it's one of the things I preach, as we are breeding, saving animals off of those best cows in our environment and saving sons off of those best cows is the quickest way to move our program forward. So, but we also, like I said, I also started a registered program. So at that time we were all commercial. So some of the first cows I bought were from Ed, actually. Ed, in fact, I think I was one of the first people Ed ever sold heifers to. He had been saving and building his herd up, and really growing. And after a couple years of buying bulls from him, I think he took a shine to me and sold me a few of his heifers. And I bought those for 2 years. And that was the start. Him and another mentor, Bill Hodge sold me a small group of his cows as well. And so that was my start in the purebred Angus world.
Two things there. I think the, cattle bred to your local environment's so important. We've been doing this on a small scale for a long time. I'm learning stuff all the time that I should have known for years. A couple of years ago, I purchased some heifers that were trucked in. I knew better, but I needed some cows. I bought them. I have 0 of them still in my herd. And I thought they would work for me, but they came from the north and they were trucked in. I thought, we'll be okay. I'll suffer a few losses, then I'll have some. No, I'm 2 years from that, and they've all been culled out of my herd for various reasons.
We're certainly put here on earth to learn our lessons, right? So the key is not making the same mistake more than 2 times.
Right. Yes. Well, that cost me enough. I'll definitely think twice before I make that mistake again. And then the second thing, you got into purebred Angus. And when we were talking about British breeds a while ago, you mentioned some other breeds such as Devon or Hereford, or you could even go Red Pole or another. Why did you choose Angus? Was it because your grandfather had been involved in Angus and you were that direction, or what contributed to that decision?
Sure. It was more about relationships. If Ed Oliver had Herefords, I probably would have bought Herefords, So it was recognizing a breeder. And this is another thing that I often tell people is, and we can get to this later in the conversation, but, when you're getting started in this, find people who do what you want to do well, especially those who are in your environment, and learn as much as you can from them. And so I had a lot of respect just after a short time with Ed, had a lot of respect for how he went about making breeding decisions and his program. And so, my mentors were the people who got me started in the Black Angus world. Now, as I have more seasons breeding under my belt, I'm continuing to refine heat tolerance, because the one thing, I've recognized is that, British breed cattle are from Britain. They're not from South Georgia. So even though we've been selecting for those, and Ed had been selecting for those for, a few decades in Georgia, they still, are only so adapted compared to, the heat tolerant breeds, which is where I've eventually ended up is, doing some crossbreeding efforts, because, after, nearly 15 years in this industry, I've recognized, as my customers are looking for more commercial type cattle than registered cattle. I'm not trying to sell a $3,000 or $4,000 bred heifer. I'm trying to create heifers or cattle, bred cattle that can go to a commercial producer's farm and make them money. And that's, one of the challenges is you want to invest in good genetics, but at the same time, cattle is not a high margin business. And so, I'm trying to set up my program to produce cattle in a way that I can create some value for my customers, but also, in not only the price, but also the work I've put in order to provide them a product, hopefully that's going to go to their place and thrive.
Oh yeah. Very important. I'd love to continue down the path of cattle breeding more, but let's jump over and take just a little bit to talk about your operation and how you're managing your animals. And then we'll jump back because I've got questions about that heat adaptation, and we'll go from there. So when you look at your operation, tell us how you manage your cows on it.
When I got home, it was set stocking. It was a 5-strand perimeter barbed wire and ponds, and one working facility at the end of the 800 acres. Right. And so grandpa, would, if he wanted to work cows in November, in September, he's starting to get them moving in the right direction. And one of the things I struggled with when I got home was the cattle had been worked, had been pushed with trucks, had been mishandled, had been yelled at. And they had been trained to be problematic. And so, the days we would work cattle would just be stressful to everyone. We would be dog tired the next day. We would be sore, and after doing that for about 2 years, I told my employees, I was like, give me 3 years and we will not be doing this again. And that was a matter of culling. We started by culling the cattle that tried to kill us when we worked them. And then we culled the cattle that tried to jump out. And finally we made our way to the point where we'd gotten rid of our troublemakers. And once we'd done that, we started using bulls that were docile, to try to work that into the genetic component. But also we just learned how to handle cattle in a way that did not make our jobs any more difficult. So, in really learning about animal husbandry and animal handling techniques, building, better facilities. We started doing cross fencing. I started moving the cattle on a more regular basis. And when the cows see you on a daily basis, they come to understand that you're not the wolf anymore. And so to answer your question, today we, have subdivided our farms. We have perimeter electric coming off of that barbed wire so that we can hook in, mostly anywhere. And we've strategically subdivided those farms with either single strand or 2-strand permanent wire. And then also we have poly wire that we can further subdivide those farms with. And we're really flexible. If I'm traveling, we might set stock for a week or even 2 weeks, depending on the type of pasture and what our goals are at the moment. And then, in the wintertime, if we're grazing winter annuals, we might put them on for 3 hours and pull them off at lunch. We certainly try to build a lot of flexibility in our grazing systems. And the more value we have in our grass, so for instance, if we invest in annuals, we really try to maximize utilization and minimize waste on those pastures. On some of our lower productivity pastures, there's times where I want my cattle to be able to be more selective because performance will increase. And so I'll give up, some of the soil health building properties of having a high stock density for just the ability for, say, those 2 and 3 year old, young cows to be able to kind of pick and choose to be able to thrive a little better, during a tough time.
Right. Which all that makes sense as you're setting it up, as you're using it. One thing I want to touch on is that training your cattle to go through your facilities to train them to be around you because, the cows are reacting to you. The big eye opener for us, we were loading out steers and they went into, and I wasn't home. I work off the farm. So I was at work and of course Dad thought he could do it. And those yearling plus steers ran in, hit the front of the trailer and started back out and he couldn't get the gate closed and it knocked him down. And luckily no one stepped on him and he walked away fine. But right then said, we got to make a change. This is ridiculous. Like you said, we started paying attention to docility of the bulls we were purchasing. We started handling our cows different. Dad still is a little bit, he's a little harsher with the cows than I am. I can work him. It's amazing. I just go out there. I enjoy the whole day. It doesn't matter how long it takes. It's just a nice, calm thing. And I've trained those cows and they've trained me as likewise. And it just makes all the difference. Like that day after, I'm still sore because I'm just out of shape, but it's not for the same reasons.
It's amazing. Once you develop good cattle handling skills, it is enjoyable. It is enjoyable to move cattle in an efficient manner, in a quiet manner, and it's an art. It's a science and an art, and it's amazing how much more enjoyable your life is when you develop and hone those skills and have a team that can also employ those, because one person will wreck, a working job. And often, I'll send people, there's times where I don't want an extra person because, especially in a ring, like cattle work a lot better with the minimum amount of people necessary to do the job efficiently.
Now, in talking about your forages there, you've already talked about Bahia grass and Bermuda and cool season annuals. What annuals do you like to plant? And I'm making the assumption here, and I probably should never make any assumptions. Are you pasture drilling? You putting that on some no-till land, or are you tilling some land? How are you getting those cool season annuals in?
We do a little of all of that. So we still do employ some tillage because we double crop some of our cash crop ground. And with our corn, we do minimum tillage, but with our peanuts, unfortunately, the peanuts are kind of the weak link in our cash crop program where we're still doing pretty heavy tillage. And that's my long-term goal is to get away from peanut production. Presently, it's kind of a cash leader for us. And so we still grow peanuts. We're good at it historically, and they're still in, and it's still part of the process. But so on that cash crop land, we still do employ some tillage, and the main advantage of that for us especially is timely, getting a stand up timely, and then being able to graze that in November. So one of our, I think it's really important for people to understand their forage chain. So from January to December, how many days a year can you be grazing? What are the forages that fit that chain? And, how can you piece together as much grazing days as possible? Because the easiest way to spend money is for you to have to feed your cows and not just supplement, but feed your cows. And so for us, funny, the most challenging time isn't December, January, or February. We do a really good job with annuals during that period. It's actually September, October, and then the beginning of November, because while our summer perennial species are still alive and kind of kicking, we've had we've even had November, Decembers where Bahia was still growing. The quality declines greatly. And so and that's one of the challenges too with weaning weights for us, and I've even, gone back and rethought my calving dates. I've always set up my calving dates based on, that high level of nutrition that I'm trying to provide that mother at calving and post calving for the next, 60 days. But honestly, having those 6-month and 7-month-old calves on real declining forages, it's a tough time for us to put on weight. They're still coming off heat stress. The dams are starting, to milk less because of the quality. And we don't, in our journey to wean our perennial forages off of commercial fertilizer, we don't fertilize Bahia grass. I mean, and the only real fertility we apply is to our annuals and to our hay ground. And some of our hay ground we will graze as well. So our improved Bermuda grass, we've got TIF 85 hybrid Bermuda. It's great. If it has water and nutrients, it's great, but it requires inputs, and those inputs could be chicken litter. I mean, we get local chicken litter, and I try to use chicken litter when it's, affordable. There's times where I can spend, I only need 30 units of commercial fertilizer. I still use commercial from time to time, but we're very thoughtful about our usage. So much of our program is about how can these cows optimize our environment. I mean, I think that word's very important. We're not trying to maximize production. We're not trying to starve ourselves into a profit. We're trying to find that middle ground of, how can we have these cattle select for themselves to thrive in this environment and raise a decent calf, and get bred back on time year after year after year. So we got a little bit off the subject of forages, but that was in essence, kind of a lot of what's going on in my thought process. With our winter annuals, we almost think about it too from a fall grazing perspective, a winter grazing perspective, and then almost like a full season grazing perspective. Because, on some of my row crop ground, I'm going to have to get back in that field with corn in March. And so if I know I'm doing that, I don't plant I don't plant any ryegrass. I don't plant much vetch, or I plant less crimson clover because I know I'm not going to get a lot of growth out of it. If I'm going back in peanuts, or if I'm following that winter annual with a summer annual, then I'm really going with kind of that full season winter annual mix. So I'm going to bring ryegrass into the mix. I'm going to go heavier on my crimson clover and my hairy vetch. I'm going to, continue to add things like forage or spring oats, potentially cereal rye. And even last year was the first year we experimented with spring pea. And spring pea is another one of those legumes that, I don't see the production. I've only got 1 year in my belt, but typically crimson clover and hairy vetch are the two, legumes, winter legumes that really we feel like we get our money's worth out of. The other ones I add for diversity. I'm a believer in trying to piece together a mix that, yes, does focus first and foremost on forage production and quality, but at the same time, we want to add smaller amounts of forages that we feel like are going to benefit, that complex biology, trying to rebuild, our soil biological life. And just to follow up, our fall mix, if we can get in there early, especially if we have tillage, is predominantly brassicas and spring oats. Spring oats really come out of the ground quickly, wide blade, good regrowth. We've had really good luck with them. So,
well, I was just going to ask you about brassicas, see if you planted those and utilized those in your program. So you beat me to it.
More so in our clean tillage, we find that the real small seeded brassicas struggle in an overseeded operation. Now the daikons and the bigger seeded brassicas do pretty well. We also have a time limit. If it's after mid-October, late October, we really don't see the fall growth, and we don't get our money's worth as much as if we can get those in late September, early October.
One thing that kind of jumps back to your location, how's the rainfall or your precipitation year round? Is it pretty spread out? Do you have a dry summer?
And not only are the weather forecasters progressively worse, but I understand why. I think our historical, I think for a long time, October was our driest month. which is good for peanut harvest, not good for, trying to get winter annuals out of the ground. Weather patterns are more varied. I don't have 50 years of weather data to say that. Just anecdotally from the last 15 years since I've been home, unpredictable. I'll say, we haven't, since I've been home, we've probably only had one real extended, costly dry period. And I think that was back in, was it 13? A lot of the country was dealing with it. I think it was after Texas and you guys had dealt with it. But we enjoy 42 to 48 inches of rainfall a year, and it's spread pretty well throughout the year. So it's a good place to have a cow-calf operation. Our grass, if anything, our grasses can get a little washy, just from our soil type and the amount of rainfall we get but I'm not complaining.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like you need to. We don't get, we're probably on the lower end of that rain range you gave there, but we definitely have some rainy periods and some dry periods, which presents some new, or not new, it's been going on for centuries, some other challenges here as opposed to where you're at. Of course, you've got your own challenges there.
And our soil type is real sandy, so we certainly dry out quicker than a lot of the heavier soil regions. And I don't necessarily have a firm drought plan in place because of the amount of rain we get on a regular basis. I am thoughtful about not overtaxing, my land in a dry situation. So if we have to feed hay in July, we'll feed hay in July. We haven't been to the point where I've felt like we've had to actually destock. And there's times too where we will use summer annuals almost as a redundancy plan, so that, if we feel like we're approaching being overstocked, we'll have those to kind of fall back on. And they're not a cheap redundancy plan. They're probably cheaper than bringing hay in and feeding hay. So
when we talk about your cattle management, what has been some of your challenges?
What we do as ranchers and as farmers it's not easy to execute 365 days a year. Not only are we dealing with the unexpected and fixing problems on a daily basis, but we are also asked to wear a lot of hats. And so I think even, while I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on a lot of the major concepts and the how-tos, executing that consistently 365 days a year it can be challenging. And so, and also, you would think just raising one species, I would have made it simple enough for myself. But unfortunately, I've got 3 farms, and we have, 9 to 12 different herds we manage, from our replacement heifers to our bulls that we sell, our bull battery that we keep, our registered red Angus cattle, our registered black Angus cattle, our commercial cattle. So we have, different management groups. We feel, and there's times where, like right now, all my bulls are running together. I have 50 bulls in a pasture, and that's, not perfectly ideal for those long yearling bulls. They probably would benefit from some type of, improved protein forage, but we make sacrifices in order to accomplish the whole, I think, and also to recognize that, there's only so much we can do. Labor is obviously, one of the most expensive parts of what we do. And we try to do a lot with a little. I was a one-man show for quite a while, and I would steal from the row crop help from time to time to bale hay and to help work cows and that kind of thing. Today I have, one full-time helper, which allows me to focus more on marketing, to travel more to conferences, which we market at some of those as well, and to really think more about the working on the business and not working in the business, as they say, and ranching for profit.
And Dan, great conversation. We're going to go back to cattle and some of that discussion, but we're also going to, do our overgrazing section where we take a deeper dive into some aspect of your operation. And we talked a little bit earlier, and we were going to talk more about heifer and bull development.
One of the things I recognized as I, started my networking experience and gaining mentors is one of the things that I found fault in the registered business, in the sheep stock business, was I felt like a lot of those people were trying to maximize production and produce, really big muscled bulls at 14, 16 months and really chasing maximums and mostly chasing terminal traits. And honestly, that's a good thing for a lot of people. I mean, a lot of breeders just need a terminal bull, and they just need to sell all the calves, into that feeder market. But I think, there's certainly a percentage of the population that doesn't completely understand about the separation between terminal and maternal genetics. And also, I think doesn't see a clear picture sometimes of like what some people claim is maternal versus, what I believe is truly maternal. And we can all define that differently. But I think if anything, the way I've set up my program to try to raise cattle is to almost do the opposite. And I have to be careful about that as well, because if you really make a cow work in a low energy environment, she will work in a lot of places, but you can also remove the milk production and make the cattle too small for a lot of environments. So, if we've done anything, we've probably over challenged our cows at times in order to pressure fertility and in order to find the type of cattle that will work in our program. We do use annuals. We really try to have these cows grazing as many days of the year as possible. But we offer, almost zero supplement. I mean, right around weaning, we have used whole cottonseed before, but besides that, it's hay and forage. And it's, like I said earlier, a lot of that is unfertilized as well. And so the protein content's lower. Bahia grass is already kind of a low energy, washy grass. But what I find, the value I see in raising cattle this way is it does take longer for these heifers to get grown. We find that our cows really aren't probably at full maturity until they're close to 4 years old. But we hope, and I'm still, we're still young in this process. We're still only about 11 years into probably my active breeding program. We've found so far that those cattle, as they go to other people's farms, are doing quite well. And that's the thing. Like, if you go to a kind of a mainstream breeder to buy breeding stock, watch what they feed their cattle, watch, the type of supplementation they're doing, and match the type of program you want to have, with your source of genetics, and there's money to be made in all different fields of cattle production. So there's not a right way and a wrong way. You just have to recognize what your management wants to look like and find models for, if you're still building your program, for how you can do that. And then, potentially take advantage of someone else's progress, especially if they're in your region. You spoke earlier of, bringing cattle from another region in your area. I've done that as well. I thought, when I got started with this, that I really wanted some of those old line Angus genetics, and then brought them in from different places. Some of those cattle have worked fine. Some of them were so old line that they didn't like Georgia at all. They marble on grass, great. But, if the cows don't get rebred because they don't slick off in time, that they can suffer. With bulls too, especially, and this is one of the things that is so obvious, when you come to my place, we don't try to sell a lot of bulls. We are a little bit in that Pharaoh model of, we put a lot of pressure on our cattle from a fertility perspective. So we can only support a certain amount of growth. So our bull customers are people who want to raise grass finished beef or want to save replacement heifers, especially in this kind of southeastern region. I mean, that's where I feel like my genetics are going to be most valuable. Having said that, we grow them pretty slow. I don't really even show bulls. I mean, if you come to my place, I'll show you anything here, but I don't really market them until they're around 2 years old, coming into that second winter of annuals. And we find that about that time, at about that 20-month to 22-month period, they really start putting on muscle. They really start, they're cresting, pretty aggressively. And they just really look and fit like bulls at that period. And they have enough athleticism and growth to where we feel like, we're comfortable putting them on 30 cows. But the advantage of not feeding those bulls, of letting those bulls make those bulls work in the environment, is that you see the top end, you see the bottom end, and you see the middle. And feed is not covering that up. And so if you want, if you want the best bull I have, you see the two of them out there, and they're a little more than the middle ones, and the middle ones are a little more than the bottom ones. It's really a good operation. It's a good way to separate the genetics that really thrive in the environment from the ones that, just are doing okay.
And when you talk about your heifers growing slow and, not seeing that mature size reaching till 4 or so, are you still calving at 24 months, or what's your philosophy on getting them into production?
It's funny you ask that, because it's something I've been thinking about hard over the last 6 months. And part of this was kicked off by, I just started about 2 or 3 years ago, crossbreeding with Centipole, a heat tolerant breed that came out of St. Croix. When my first Centipole, half Centipole, Sten Angus cows came, into production, and I exposed them. And I typically, depending on how many heifers I want to sell, I will expose those heifers for as little as, I've exposed them for as little as 30 days, and I've exposed them probably for as many as 75 days. If I want to sell more heifers, I'll expose them for a little longer. I choose the heifers out of the cattle that I want to save daughters out of. But so much of my business is marketing bred females. So depending on how many I'm looking to sell in a year, I might leave those bulls in a little bit longer. But last year I had about a 48 day breeding window. And what I found is that my half Centipole cattle actually, even though I felt like size wise, body condition scoring, they were, neck and neck or just as good as my straight Angus cattle, my Baldy cattle. They didn't get bred up at near the percentage that my straight Angus cattle did. And, thinking it through, I would have thought that the heterosis, they would actually got bred at a higher value. But this Centipole, from what I believe, based on physically what I've seen, they mature a little slower than the British breeds. Testicle development is a little bit, behind from a time frame perspective. And I think, Centipole breeders out there, you can disagree with me because I'm not a Centipole breeder. But I think that what we're seeing is a little later maturity in those animals, and even in the half-bloods. I re-exposed those animals to calve at 2.5, and every one of them got bred. And I didn't do anything differently. It was just a time period. There's been times where I have kept heifers around that didn't get bred to calve at 2.5 or 3, and then market all those. And what I've seen is in my program, they typically wean a heavier calf, when they're calving at a later date. So, in my head now, the gold standard has always been early maturity. And we've really prided ourselves on the fact that we have, straight bred cattle that will get bred at 50% of their adult weight. I mean, like really light. Unfortunately, though, you're going to have a higher percentage of dystocia. You're not going to wean as big a calf, and they're going to, if we don't do anything special for those cattle, they're going to have a tougher time getting bred back to calve at 3, and then also just struggle to get grown. So the jury's still out for me. I'm trying to decide if I want to do a better job of managing annuals and providing them with, a better intake, better, energy. If there is a strategic supplementation that I would like to employ without propping the cattle up, or if it's just a matter of potentially having those cattle calve at 2.5. And, I heard Jaime Elizondo talk about, the further we get into the tropics, the more those cattle are really set up to calve later. And I think that I see a little of that we're right at the verge of the subtropics here in South Georgia. I think I see a little of that in the quality of our forage and really trying to make these cattle work, just in this kind of forage only environment. that is just more difficult. I mean, we've had as high as 88% of our heifers get bred in a 30-day period, but they were they were in really good flesh condition. Our average is we probably average about 2 cycle exposure, about 40 to 50 days. And our probably average breed up is around 84%. So,
which that conception rate's so much better than what we've been doing. And actually that's what led us to look at some other breeds from what we were originally using, was because we were getting into, our cattle were late maturing, and we were spending so much to get a replacement heifer going. And then we were having half of them breed. And so we're playing with that. We don't have the answers. I don't have the answers for much. We're trying to figure it out. So it's really interesting to have that conversation and find out your thoughts on it and where you're going with that.
It's funny because I've definitely changed thought over time, and I used to think calving at 2 is the only way. Like, that is the only way to provide enough fertility pressure to be this pushback against all these programs that have propped up, fertility with inputs. But I think it's just more nuanced than that. I think every program has that question to answer for themselves, based on their management, their forages, and what their goals are.
And one thing you mentioned about bringing some Cinepol in. And earlier in the conversation, you had mentioned about getting a little bit more adaptability for heat. Is that the direction you went to bring that in? Did you look at any other directions?
Yeah, I did. I haven't, honestly, I didn't probably do the full due diligence that I've done in the past with my bringing Angus and Red Angus in. I pretty much relied on relationships to steer me towards my experiments with Cinepol. I had a close friend and breeder in Tennessee who had success with Mark Sanders and Millertown Cinepols. They're just outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. And I went up and visited his farm. He's a longtime active member and past president of the Cinepol, one of the national Cinepol associations, and found some cows in that herd I really liked. Moderate, some real moderate cattle that I thought would complement, a lot of my breeding goals well. And was fortunate that the cattle in the herd that I really admired and had that phenotypically really fit my bill, I had the opportunities to buy sons out of both of those cows. And so that was the start of my breeding. I'd considered Mashona. I'd been around, just a few Mashona cattle and bulls. Their coat quality is just something else. I mean, I was really blown away how oily and shiny slick those cattle were. I was concerned that the Mashona cattle might downsize. A lot of the Mashonas I've been around were small cows. And I did not need to I'd put enough pressure on my cattle that I didn't need to make them any smaller. I mean, my cattle fit great in a kind of a grass finishing environment in the South, especially. But if anything, I wanted to have just a little more power and growth so that people who are just selling into conventional marketplace would also have, something that would work for them, which is why I went with Cinepol. The Cinepol were, more of the size and type that matched my cows. I recently also, so I had the opportunity to go back to the Grass Fed Exchange last year at Fort Worth and met Watt Casey, who's become a close friend of mine. Watt's family, Casey Beefmaster, is one of the original 3 foundation herds of the Beefmaster breed. And Watt and his family had one cycle breeding program since 1977. So they have exposed their cows for 25 days since 1977 and culled or sold everything that didn't get bred, which at some point people valued the program so well that they would pay a premium for those cattle that came up open. And so I don't know how long they've been doing it, but they'll re-expose those opens over a period and then they'll sell all those bred. And Watt said they almost all get bred for a premium even, right? I mean, once you've established a program like that. And they're hardworking, moderate, good uddered, high IMF, no nonsense cattle. I probably wouldn't have just chosen Beefmaster had I not kind of fallen in love with his herd and their program. I bought a handful of cows and a bull, and I am also experimenting with crossing Beefmaster, not only over my commercial cows, but some of my registered cows as well. I really want to take some of those best black and red cows and make some just dynamite F1s out of them. So kind of excited about that future and seeing what those new calf crops will be like.
Yeah, that'll be exciting to see how that goes and just follow your journey on. Dan, it's time for us to go ahead and transition to our famous 4 questions. Same 4 questions we ask of all of our guests. And our very first question, what's your favorite grazing grass-related book or resource?
I tell people, especially in the Southeast, if you could only own one book, it would probably be Southern Forages. And it's a textbook, but it's kind of the Bible of I would say, of Southern grazing. And it's just a complete education of forages, forage type, planting regimens, and raising cattle on grass. And so if I could only have one book, it would certainly be Southern Forages. But it is pretty region specific. I mean, there's something in it for everyone, but from Texas to Virginia, I think it's really a valuable book.
Very good. Very good. Excellent selection there. Our second question, what is your favorite tool for the farm?
I would say polywire. I would say the ability to subdivide, manage, and move cattle in a very efficient and cheap manner has really changed the game for thousands of breeders across the country, and especially in the East where our paddock size is smaller and we have a lot more dense forage swards. It's an indispensable tool. It would be one of the last things I would give up.
Yeah, polywire has done so much for me. And I mean, there's times I don't like it very well, but for the most part, I like it.
Yeah. The ability to not only improve production, but also just training cattle. I mean, once you have, a group of cows used to following you, they are easier to live with for the rest of their lives.
This just amazes me, and I've done this multiple times now, and I've only done it in the last year or 2. I can pull out in a pasture with my trailer and some polywire, and I can load cows that I need out of there. Which, if you'd told me even just 10 years ago, I'd said, you're crazy, I can't do that. It's amazing, these cows that our home place here, we have all the pastures permanently subdivided. And I don't use much polywire here. I've got lease places and I use polywire. So that's one of the big differences. But I'm just amazed. Of course, the cows are calm. They're used to me being out there. And it's just every time I leave there with some loaded, I want to call my wife and say, guess what I did? And she's like, really? Do I have to hear about it again? But it's so amazing to me. Polywire and a trailer and calm cows, I can do anything. Our third question. What would you tell someone just getting started?
I listened to the Michael Vance podcast on the way up here, and his answer was pretty much exactly mine, which is create relationships, find people who, and I said it earlier in the podcast, but find people who are successful doing what you want to do and become friends with them. Visit them at their farm, ask questions, develop these networks and these relationships. They'll be invaluable. There's also, in a lot of states, for me, I use extension aggressively. So much free education out there or very cheap education. One of the most valuable things I did and one of the most expensive things I did was a Ranching for Profit, the week-long course. If you're not at the point where you can afford, a full week-long course, they do short courses as well. And a lot of times those are sponsored by soil and water conservation groups and national groups. Having a relationship and really I think a lot of what Ranching for Profit and ranch management consultants has to offer. If you're new to this, look into them. They have an incredible curriculum and just an amazing set of instructors. And they don't pay me to say that either. I just had a great experience.
To be honest, I only hear good things about going to their conference. People coming back saying what they've learned and what they're implementing and how things are going. That's just essential to their success. So they are definitely doing good things.
And you said conferences, which reminds me of that as well. So that's another thing that I've done is I started going pretty aggressively to different conferences. So the American Forage and Grassland Council, the National Grazing Lands Coalition has one every 3 years. Grass-Fed Exchange, I've been going to since it was at Gabe Brown's, over 10 years ago. Great group of young people. If I could only go to one, it's probably one of my favorites, just because there's so many outside the box thinkers and so many, thought movers. So a lot of opportunities there, even, some of the cattlemen's events, depending on your state, there's a lot of resources out there, but nothing beats boots on the ground, at a ranch near you with someone who's successful in making their living. Like Michael said, someone who's making their living doing it. If that's what you want to do, it can be a hobby. There's nothing wrong with this lifestyle being a hobby. I tell people my cows are my blood pressure medicine. This isn't a hobby for me, but when I come home after traveling, after seeing my family, the first thing I want to do is ride through my cows.
An excellent advice there, Dan. And Dan, lastly, where can others find out more about you?
Sure. So I have a website, deepgrassgraziers.com, Graziers. And also I'm relatively active on Facebook. So you can definitely check me out there. Feel free to call, email, text, come visit. I have people at least once a month come to the farm. So I love talking about cattle, riding cattle. It's a passion of mine. So, and I try to help everyone who comes to me. So, and if you buy an animal from me, I'll answer the phone every time.
Well, wonderful, Dan. We really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us today.
Cal, is a lot of fun. So thanks a lot and keep this up. I just discovered your show. I love it. And I'm a new follower. So,
well, thank you. I appreciate it. You're listening to the Grazing Grass Podcast, helping grass farmers learn from grass farmers. And every episode features a grass farmer and their operation. If you've enjoyed today's episode and want to keep the conversation going, visit our community at community.grazinggrass.com. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to the Grazing Grass Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube for past and future episodes. We also welcome guests to share about their own grass farming journey. So if you're interested, fill out the form on grazinggrass.com under the Be Our Guest link. Until next time, keep on grazing grass.